Welcome to the National Center for Rural Road Safety's September webinar on Rural Roundabout Planning, Design, and Outreach. We're very excited you're all here with us today. My name is Jamie Sullivan, and I am the Director for the National Center for Rural Road Safety. We have a few webinar logistics for you. Today's webinar is an hour and a half, and we do hope to have quite a bit of time at the end today for questions. So you can put those questions that you may have in our Q&A pod, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. We do also have a chat pod available for information. But again, if you have questions, please make sure to share those in the question pod so that we can find them more easily. To activate closed captions for our webinar, you can click on the Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen. We have an example of that shown on the right-hand side of the slide right now. You can also use that down arrow to adjust the captions under the caption settings. Today's webinar will be recorded for archival and will be available on our website at ruralsafetycenter.org/webinar-archive within the next week. You can also find all of our previously recorded webinars in that location as well. Handouts will be available for download. I will post those in the chat pod here as we get started. So after I introduce our first speaker, we'll put those in there for you to download. Additionally, we will have a feedback form at the end of today's webinar. We would love to hear from you additional topics that you'd like to hear over the next year. So please go ahead and fill that out for us. Today's webinar is brought to you by that feedback form. We heard from you very clearly that you all wanted one more Roundabouts webinar. So we do look at those feedback forms and take that information in. So please go ahead and give us additional suggestions as well. Additionally, we will have certificates of completion available for today's webinar and an application available for you if you need the more formal CEUs from the university. Those completion certificates will be sent to you within 4 weeks of today's webinar. And then once you receive those, there will be that application. Please apply for those CEUs within 4 weeks if you need them. The university is asking for within 4 weeks of you receiving that email. Otherwise, they may not be able to provide those CEUs to you. We have a few brand new announcements for you all. We have a new Home Safely podcast that will be released today on our website at this QR code. Again, all of these resources that I'm going to send to you and all of these QR codes will be posted in the chat pod later. So if you miss any of them, you'll be able to download this information. But Amanda Austin, who is a Roundabout and Alternative Intersection Design Lead for Texas Department of Transportation, was our guest speaker for episode 3. In this conversation, she talks about TxDOT's Roundabout initiative and why roundabouts are crucial to saving lives on rural roadways. Additionally, the Road Safety Champion program, our Safety 101 program, is in the works right now. Next week, we will be hosting Core Module 7 on the safety analysis process. And then October, November, and December, we will be running our maintenance and construction pathways and our planning and engineering pathways and piloting our brand new first responder and public health pilots as well. So would love to see you attend those. Few new resources to make sure you're aware of. NHTSA has released their 2023 data for traffic safety and have updated their rural and urban traffic fatalities document, if you're interested in that. They have also released some post-crash care resources. There are new infographics, including one on pre-hospital blood, as well as updating the national information on fatalities that were alive when first responders arrived at the scene. They have updated this information by state, and there's a map now that provides that information. So if you joined us for Rural Road Safety Awareness Week this summer, here are some updated resources for you on those topics. We also have been notified that the Federal Advisory Committee opportunities are open right now. They're accepting nominations on or before October 20th for the Motorcyclist Advisory Council and the National Emergency Medical Services Advisory Council. So if either of those are of interest to you, please go to these QR codes to learn more at their Federal Register notifications. And then lastly, it is Roundabouts Week. So happy Roundabouts Week, everybody. And FHWA has released some media kit information for this week. So if you'd like to post about Roundabouts Week in the remainder of this week, there's some more information, a media kit, fact sheets, customizable press releases, social media graphics. There is some video footage and also a public service announcement. And those are all available at Federal Highway Administration's Roundabouts Week website. Today, I'm very excited that we have 3 experts in Roundabouts to answer all of your questions and provide you more information. And we're going to start out with Brian Ray, who is a professional engineer from the Sunrise Transportation Strategies. He has over 40 years of consulting experience in performance-based multimodal planning and design, and he was the principal investigator on NCHRP Research Report 1043, A Guide for Roundabouts. And I'm very excited to hand over our presentation right now to Brian.
Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. I'm sort of watching people sign up, and it's glorious to see so many people across the country, so welcome. I did have just a quick question for you. NCHRP Report 672 was the Roundabout Informational Guide 2nd edition. It came out in 2010. I was just curious if you could raise your hand. This isn't scientific. Just how many of you people attending are still using NCHRP Report 672 as your primary support for roundabout planning and design? So yeah, nothing scientific. If you wouldn't mind just using the raise your hand button down at the bottom of the sheet, or bottom of the page, or bottom of the screen. And I can't tell if anybody's raising their hand, but we'll give it just a second longer. Oh, I'm seeing.
Brian, I am not seeing any on here.
Okay, no problem. I see that there's folks who say no hand icon in the menu, so we probably, so that was a dirty trick on my part. The second part then, and I do appreciate those of you who are sharing in the chat. My next question then is NCHRP Research Report 1043, Guide for Roundabouts, was published in 2023. And I was just curious how many of you people who are attending are using NCHRP 1043. If you don't mind just throwing your notes in there. Oh, looking some, I've seen the hands, I've seen some thumbs up. All right, good, good. Well, it's as a principal investigator, it's always nice to know that the documents that you're working on are getting used. So with that, let me go ahead and share my presentation. And if somebody could verify that you have the presentation up, I'd appreciate that.
Yep, we can see it.
Great, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here for Roundabout Weeks, and I've outlined and given presentations on NCHRP Report 1043 before, but I really think that this rural roundabout application is especially important. And what I hope to cover today is to share with you about the guide, how it's different from a little bit of the changes from NCHRP 672, but really try to touch upon where and how we might apply the guide in rural locations. And the basic question of, did you know that some of the earliest, I don't want to get too finite, but some of the earliest roundabout applications were in rural areas? I think this is fantastic. And in the 1990s, Maryland State Highway Administration wanted to address fatal and severe crashes on highways. And they had heard a lot about European safety performance of roundabouts. And after having some advocacy, people really pushing, the State Highway Administration said, let's give it a try at Lisbon. And they went out and did special outreach at that time to say, hey, we've got this new thing called a roundabout. We think it's going to be really good. It's different than what you've seen. And we'd like to give it a try. And if you don't like it, we'll take it out. And when the roundabout went in, one, it was operationally quite effective, but it actually generated a lot of support from the community. And there's two real important lessons here. One is the importance of outreach, of really talking to our constituents, and Shannon will talk a little bit more about that in our session. But two is that the rural applications. And the roundabout was so successful that when SHA went out at a next location and said, well, we're thinking about this roundabout. We're thinking about whether we will give you that option of putting it in or taking it out if you don't like it. Everybody really liked it. So anyway, the roundabout in this rural application was a success in many ways. And where we are from the 1990s to 2025 is, if I look at that picture of that roundabout, it may not be ideal or even optimal compared to some of the criteria that we use today. But the important part is it's effective and it's been effective. And I went on to Google and took a look at it again, and here it is. And so it hasn't changed much in nearly 30 years. It has smaller splitter islands, no curving, but it just really tells you how resilient roundabouts can be, and really why in NCHRP report 1043, we really emphasized flexibility, looking for an optimal roundabout and not a perfect roundabout. So what I want to cover is a little bit about the research report overview, research and some of the syntheses, letting you know what's in there, what's new, talk to you a little bit about the design process and a little bit about the guide organization. So how can you use this document if you haven't before? So first of all, if you haven't had it, NCHRP is incredible for their ability to put documents out for free. So if you don't have the document, you can actually just look it up, Google NCHRP report 1043, go to the site, and you can get it for free. That's an amazing thing in this day and age. This new roundabout guide has parts and chapters that reflect the project development stages. So if you're early on in the concept work, it helps you there. It emphasizes planning and design in context. And that's really a key aspect. And you'll hear me chat about that a lot, about context. But one is about what project type is it? Is it new? Is it a reconstruction? What's my built natural environment, which can be especially important in a rural environment? And what's the context classification? And if you don't know about what that word is, trust me, that's going to be the trend of where our industry is going. You know of functional classification, but context classification is really where we're going. But it's user focused. And what it really says is let's work about roundabout design as a continuum of the forms and not get so caught into what type it is and be restricted in that way. But it's performance driven to support roundabout implementation. Roundabouts save lives. Let's help support their success. I want to let you know there was a lot of new research conducted about trucks and design for bicycles. There was synthesized information about roundabout design and implementation. A lot of information we looked at about intersection control evaluations. But the intent was to build upon the good work from NCHRP report 672 and integrate lessons that have come up since then. But the guide also includes findings and guidance from a variety of sources, from highway safety manual, highway capacity manual, NCHRP documents. And if you look at these three documents, 834, 948, these really emphasize pedestrians and those pedestrians with visual impairments. But it also helps support some of our work from quantitative safety performance. But it's also looking at some other areas too, from a Green Book visioning, looking to the future edition, FHWA pooled fund studies, and contemporary practices. So 1043 really represents a nice snapshot of where our industry is now, and even a look ahead to where some of the things are going. So I want to share with you a little bit about what's new in the guide itself. So as I mentioned, in designing for trucks, we did a state of practice. We looked at truck industry outreach, again, emphasizing the importance of outreach, driver behavior, data collection. For designing bicycles, we did state of the practice review, virtual field reviews, and identified bicycle treatment concepts. And I'll encourage you, if you really want to get into more detail beyond the 1043 document, this web-only document, 347, has all of the detail of the report. So what we're really talking about, though, is it's the reflection of the change of the roundabout practice, the continued involvement. In designing for trucks, what's interesting, and there used to be something called case 1, case 2, case 3. Some people had a case 2A and a 3B. And what we found was most drivers operated in case 2 and 3 roundabouts as if they were case 1, where you could straddle the lanes. And what we found, of course, is that making the roundabouts larger, case 2 and case 3, those former criteria, they make the roundabout so much bigger that they increase the passenger car speeds, longer crossing distances, increased construction costs, and many times roundabouts weren't built. But I think here's a really good lesson. We as engineers were designing for case 1, case 2, case 3. Our users, the truck drivers, didn't know how to use them. So let's make sure we know where and how our users operate. So the guide itself recommends 2 things, straddle lanes or stay-in lanes. And the straddle lane is designed, is suggested as the beginning point because most truck drivers simply don't know how to use the traffic control devices, the roundabouts. That's not saying they're bad truck drivers. It's just that we haven't conveyed that in a way. But now we can use turbo roundabout features to support lane discipline for stay-in-lane designs. But what the intent here in 1043 was that getting a roundabout implemented was more important than losing a roundabout because we couldn't achieve that former case 2 or case 3 configuration. So there's nothing wrong with designing for stay-in-lane designs, but we don't want to lose the opportunity for roundabouts if we can't get that feature. While bicycles have changed a lot, bicycle principles, techniques, and design have changed so much since 2010, but there's an emerging typology. And what we were looking for was designing for interested but concerned category of cyclists. And what we find in the guide is bicycle treatments in the guide really illustrate a range of different treatments for a variety of configurations, and you can mix and match those. But the intent was to focus on principles that allow you to make flexible design decisions for your project, for your context at that location. There's a lot of information too about designing for bikes and then pedestrians, of course, but what we were looking for is fundamental principles of reducing speeds at the conflict points, separating modes where we can, clearly communicating the priority for each of the users, providing simple and direct alignments, making sure that our geometrics were supporting how we'd like it to operate, making sure that there were safe and comfortable spaces for people to work through the intersection form. So the new guide includes a lot of material about walking surfaces and how to support people with low vision, lots and lots of examples of ped and bike treatments for a variety of locations. We can't get every single one, but you can mix and match and put the pieces together. There is some expanded information about performance checks, and Katie will talk a little bit more about that in her portion, but we updated the stopping sight distance, intersection sight distance. We added some new performance metrics for pedestrian and bicycle design flags from that NCHRP document 948. We added a pedestrian wayfinding and crossing assessment. And the intent, what I really want to emphasize here is while this is for roundabouts, all of the things that we're highlighting here are directly applicable to your other intersection forms. So don't be limited by applying these principles in roundabouts. Right now, I think the roundabout design guide has moved ahead, and these principles apply to anywhere else. Again, a lot of synthesis plans for oversized and overweight vehicle. These are common issues in rural environments. And again, Katie will talk a little bit about that. There's enough roundabouts out now that we can do in-service assessments and retrofits of our existing roundabouts to make them better. More information about mini roundabouts, economic benefit, a lot of syntheses on traffic control devices, and more information about illumination. And so what we're really trying to do is understand the practices within those various topic areas. So these synthesis plans became the input into the guidance in the NCHRP 1043 document itself. I'm just going to highlight a little bit about some of the findings from oversized, overweight vehicles. What we really found is those are often a case-by-case basis, each location, special users. And so we have a lot of different examples in the roundabout guide for that. I'll go into a little bit more detail, but what we found was providing real-world examples in the guide helps illustrate how you apply these design principles. So those performance checks that Katie will talk about are really applicable for how do we check out our existing roundabouts and make them better. Much more information about mini and compacts, and I'll emphasize this as we go through the conversation, but the whole point was you call it a mini, I call it a compact, I call it a mini, you call it a compact. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about what we call it, but we should know that anytime we go to a completely traversable central island, there's some really significant design implications of that from signing and other features. So we just want to be thoughtful about it, but don't get caught up in the name. What we found was there was no study about if I put in a roundabout, it'll generate this kind of revenue or support. But we do know we can quantify safety performance, the cost of crashes in our economic benefit analyses. A lot of information about traffic control devices and metering. But one of the things I'm excited about with metering is it may give us a chance to take some of those single lane locations to do some metering in those peak conditions and address that and not lose the opportunity of a roundabout at a location that may have been thrown out if it had to be multi-lane design. Railroad crossings there's a lot of different experiences from railroads and highway agencies and how they're addressed. So what we tried to do is really document the many considerations and allow you as planners and designers make choices based on your application, your location. More information about pedestrian crossings, and there's been a lot of current research about pedestrian crossings for wayfinding and improving accessibility for all users. And the illumination practices that changed, and I'll touch upon this a little bit, but practices vary widely. But what we've really done is tried to update some of the national design guidelines to support flexibility in designs. So just touching upon a few little things. If you look at the before and the after, these are right out of the document. But what it says is let's emphasize principles. What we know is that retrofitting roundabouts can be really complex. It can be really expensive. So that's a good reason now to take the time to plan and design them in the optimal form originally. But what we can do is those design performance checks that we look at, they can really help us understand the issues that we have. And the choices that we make in what we fix or don't fix should really be based on that existing condition and how we create the most value from it. So what you'll see is that in Chapter 9, there's example of performance checks and typical modifications, where and how to look at wayfinding assessments. And that table there is just an excerpt from Exhibit 9.31 that says if I have a geometric performance check of speed, what are some of the factors that might contribute to undesirable performance, and what's a range of solutions that we might look at to address the issue. So trying to be practical about how we can make things different. Mini and compacts, really what it says is don't worry about the name. What we really want to focus in on is the performance outcomes. We want to make sure that we're putting in and allowing traversable elements where they can support design and implementation. And what we really need to reflect the fact that when we go fully traversable, we have some different challenges or different needs about signing and decisions. So the new guide really emphasizes flexibility in the terminology. Don't worry about what we call it. And it promotes a wide range of applications. But what it says is it recognizes the value of roundabout safety performance, even operational performance in constrained locations. And let's look for ways to find roundabouts to get in the right place. So this is an interesting example. You may not want to do this in your own location with the driveway at that spot, but in this location, it was deemed that was okay. So context is everything. Illumination is really a positive change because many times in rural locations, roundabouts don't get chosen because of illumination. So what the principles of this was really focusing on the roundabout specific characteristics, reflecting the fact that even if we don't have illumination extensively, that we can do great delineation things and we can mimic the geometric features that are so critical for driver operations. And what we also found, and you'll see, is some roundabout specific lighting policies for flexibility. We want to make sure that we're sensitive to dark sky principles and support our design decisions. But what's in the guide now is illuminance criteria for streets with continuous lighting based on asphalt or Portland cement concrete. It's illumination criteria for isolated roundabouts, obviously what we find in rural locations. And it's more guidance for crosswalks and transition lighting. So that's a really big important step, I think, in the guide. And again, all of this is in there. I'm just trying to give you some highlights. So those of you who might be familiar with NCHRP 672, what we still do is have an iterative, a performance-based approach. But what we're really shooting for now is an optimal design. And what we're trying to do is the performance-based approach applies from early concepts through final design decisions. And it integrates some concepts from the current Green Book 7, and it also looks towards the future Green Book 8 edition. But what we can also do now is recognize that performance of the roundabout can help support broader goals. So if I'm doing a main street project or a complete street project where my intent is to support a walkable community, the roundabouts can be contributing to that aspect as opposed to just focusing on the roundabout performance itself. And so what we're really trying to do, though, is that first box is establish the project context and design based on that context that you have. And zooming in on that a little bit, What we find is it's scalable to each project development stage. So system planning to final design, the decisions that you make. It's trying to encourage flexible and adaptable design. But what it's also saying is we can look at outcomes beyond just the roundabout design. So if I have, again, a focus for complete streets or managing speed or economic growth and development on capacity, and it's okay to have roundabouts in to help support the movement of people and things, we can do that. But the new context allows us to think about community, culture, equity elements. So it gives us a chance to think back about, can we make things a little bit better than what was out there before? Can we fix or clean up some things that were there before? So project foundation is really the key for adaptable implementation. So the design process is still there to iterate. The intent, and this is what really confuses some engineers, is they're not used to iterating. Iteration, changes is viewed as repetition or wastefulness. But no, really what we're doing is we're trying to modify and design the elements to best meet the target performance. Not perfect performance, target performance based on context. We want to iterate as needed and sometimes repeatedly. And it's okay to iterate. I can't communicate that enough. Sometimes a roundabout isn't viable. Yep, I was a principal investigator for the guide, but sometimes roundabouts aren't the right location, right solution in all locations. So what we always want to do is consider context and intended outcomes about whether we want to advance that roundabout. And this is really a key part of intersection control evaluations and objectively evaluating our performance. A little bit about the guide itself. So for those of you who've seen it or seen it compared to NCHRP 672, it is completely different. You used to get all your stuff probably from NCHRP 672 chapter 6, and now it's changed. But what we tried to do again was organize it by the project development process. Am I in planning? Am I identifying and evaluating alternatives? Am I in preliminary design? And often preliminary design is where moving through to investigate and support environmental documentation. Am I in final design? Am I in constructions and operations or retrofitting? But the intent was to help set up where am I in the process, and so that we can divide the guide into parts with chapter groupings that support that. So for example, the introduction to roundabouts is characteristics and applications. If I'm in the early stages of planning and stakeholder considerations, those chapters 3 through 6 help really support some of that. And then of course, as I was just touching upon, there are 15 chapters that help support each of these project development stages. And what I'll note for you is that if you look at chapter 3, performance-based process, chapter 9 is geometric design performance checks, and appendix A at the bottom is performance techniques. You can really see where and how we're emphasizing project performance and performance checks. So really quickly in this part 1 component, there's update about roundabout history, update about the practice, really trying to be reflective that we have new policy level of practice decisions such as Vision Zero, safe system approach, roundabouts first policies, intersection control evaluations. We want to really focus again on types versus categories of roundabouts, and we tried to note the flexibility of innovative context. And really a key part of this was advancing good roundabouts is better than trying to advance a perfect roundabout that doesn't get implemented. I've seen a lot of good locations where roundabouts might be viable, but because they weren't perfect, they didn't get selected. Now, when we move into the planning considerations, that's where we're really trying to apply that performance-based approach. We're trying to emphasize the goals and the intended outcomes of a project. It's considering what project type is. Is it new? Is it reconstruction? Am I in a constrained environment? It's thinking about those users and really focusing in on those and the stakeholders. We can't emphasize enough about the importance of getting out and contacting and bringing stakeholders into your process. And again, Shannon will cover a little bit more about that, but also about intersection control evaluations activities. But again, context is everything in these planning considerations. When we move into part 3, we're now supporting concept and design activities. Often this is supporting intersection control evaluation or ISOP if you're in California. It includes project level performance analysis, ways to work at a planning level, ways to work into more detail. We're trying to make it easier for you to assess performance using a variety of techniques commensurate with where you are in the project development process and what level of information you have to work with. And again, a lot more information that support and is expanded upon in Appendix A. But we really need to make sure that we're establishing the performance evaluation elements first so we can test how well we got there. Part 3 highlights in the guide is updated conflict presentations about multi-lane approaches, a lot more information about safety analysis, information that we can look at traffic operations and some planning level tools based on the highway capacity manual. And we really focused in on the design vehicle for designing for versus accommodating. And what we want to make sure is we're designing the roundabout for that common design vehicle, but we're making sure we understand what can happen if we have that larger vehicle. And obviously in rural locations, we can have some special vehicles that come through. All of this is guided by the research that we did. In the highlights again, as I mentioned, we revised sight distance for intersection and stopping sight distance. We added a lot more about peds and bikes. And all of these are really positive advances from the good work that was in NCHRP 672. Now, when we move into preliminary design, what you'll see is those 2 chapters of horizontal and vertical, chapter 10 and 11. You'll probably, as designers, spend most of your time in chapters 10 and 11. But it's really, how do I establish horizontal, vertical, and cross-section features that integrate each user? And that's a key point. We don't wait and see how peds are afterwards. We integrate pedestrians, bicyclists, their considerations at the onset of our geometrics. And what we're really trying to do is reflect that performance-based approach from concept into preliminary design. So we want you to be able to work at a systems planning level and understand size and shape and some of the features. But now we want to move into and support your design decisions through final design. But it's all of the content you'll need for horizontal, vertical, and cross-section design. And these apply to final design. So while we're getting the 3-dimensional design here, those of you who have done roundabout work know that we need to get into and apply that at the planning level. So again, there's a lot of information about the performance influences, a lot more about pedestrians and those users with low vision, a lot more pedestrian treatments and examples, and then discussion from high speed to low speed. And I'll touch upon that for a second. We get more into, again, oversized and overweight vehicles, lots of expanded text in chapter 10 about compact features, mini roundabouts, and more content about turbo. So let me tell you, don't be tripped up by turbo design. And we really tried to demystify that to say a turbo roundabout is a multi-lane roundabout that has features or elements that support lane discipline. That's all there is. So just keep that in mind. Don't get mystified by a turbo. But anyway, there's a lot more information to support your decision making. So I wanted to quickly touch upon historical safety value of rural roundabouts. Overall, it's a reduction in crashes, really truly reduced crash frequency and severity. There can be an increase in single vehicle crashes. But the key is we're trying to maximize visibility at Central Island, add changes to the cross section to alert drivers. And again, I mentioned Maryland started off with a rural approach. Where this comes from is really the principles from NCHRP Research Report 613 provides sufficient transition between the segments and the intersection areas. Support that through human factors needs, comfortable deceleration. And if we look at this example, you can say way off in the distance, the typical section coming into the round influence area, painted gore, raised splitter islands and outside curbs, and a large landscape Central Island. Well, this was right after construction. I assure you that this roadway, this portion today is quite vibrant. And just a quick example from using exhibit 10.108. If you had a design speed of your roadway of 65 miles per hour, we have a target speed at our crosswalk of 0 for pedestrians, then this helps you identify that the desired deceleration length is 570 feet. So that can help you in your real application that at my roundabout, that's one thing, but I might need to be looking at 500-600 feet upstream. So again, part 5 is design and implementation about how do I get from preliminary to final, a lot about construction maintenance elements, a lot more about traffic control elements, curb and pavement, illumination. And I really want to emphasize that design doesn't begin at design. And so many of these topics about curb, details, pedestrians, am I going to have pedestrian hybrid beacons? What do I need to do about construction sequencing and maintenance? Many of these questions actually can inform your initial design. So it's a really interesting process in roundabout design. We reorganize the traffic control devices by where they are in the roundabout. So what do I need at the entry? What do I need circulating? What do I need exiting? There's a lot more photos. There's expanded conversations about signals and beacons and at roundabouts, including metering applications. And again, there's a lot more information there about illumination methods that increase your design flexibility, which is especially important in rural locations. And I just want to emphasize that this appendix provides a variety of techniques that can facilitate the design process. It complements the text in Chapter 9. There's new multimodal checks in there to take a look at. And these techniques, though, are representative but not exhaustive. And sometimes you'll have to modify these techniques and methods to meet your own specific configurations. So in closing, roundabout design continues to evolve for the better. The NCHRP Research Report 1043 builds upon and expands the really solid base of NCHRP Report 672. Rural conditions are wonderful opportunities to apply roundabouts, and the safety performance alone is just outstanding. And NCHRP 1043 provides principles to support design flexibility in rural applications for your planning, design, and your implementation. And we're going to put questions to the end. I just want to encourage you that if we can't cover any of your questions today, contact me. Happy to share how we can help you implement 1043. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jamie.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brian. That was a wealth of information. We have a ton of questions that have come in. Again, just a reminder for everyone, I have started pulling some of the questions out of the chat pod. Please, if you would like to ask your questions to our presenters, please try and put those in the Q&A pod, as it's easier for us to find those, because there is a lot of back and forth talking going in the chat pod, which we highly recommend. So we just want to make sure we don't miss any of your questions that you would like to be addressed to our presenters themselves. And again, as Brian mentioned, we will ask those questions at the very end, because we have two more great speakers to talk about different pieces of roundabouts for you. And our next presenter is going to be Shannon Lambert, who is also a professional engineer and a senior transportation engineer roundabout subject matter expert at Jacobs. She spent her 20-year career focused on transportation safety projects with a strong emphasis on roundabouts. She believes that developing effective communication strategies is key to building trust with project partners and support in communities. And I'm very excited to turn our presentation over now to Shannon.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jamie. Let's get this up on the screen for us all. All right. Are we seeing my slide?
Yep, that's great.
Fabulous. Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about community outreach, because I really do believe that it's the key to building roundabouts. We have to have trust in order to improve our relationships and to move projects forward. So today, what I'm going to be talking about is what is outreach, why it matters, how we can develop an outreach strategy, and some lessons learned along the way. So, what is outreach and why does it matter? Well, we tend to use this term interchangeably a lot in the engineering world. It might be community outreach, public involvement, community engagement. Any of those are all used commonly in our sphere. But for the purposes of our conversation today, community outreach is a strategic effort by agencies to inform, involve, and build trust with affected communities. So following very much what Brian mentioned earlier is that every roundabout is different, every design is different, every outreach plan is different. There are no one-size-fits-all solutions. So now, why does outreach matter? Largely because the public is often skeptical about roundabouts, and particularly in rural situations. There are concerns about high-speed approaches, about freight mobility, and often, at least in my area, agricultural vehicles, being able to get tractors and combines and whatnot through. So that tends to be a big issue that we need to discuss with communities and share with them in clear and open ways that we understand these concerns and we're designing deliberately for these elements. Another common concern that comes up a lot is discomfort. Roundabouts are new in a lot of areas, and many drivers have never seen this form of intersection control before. And that can be really uncomfortable as we try to learn something new. I think that many of us did not have roundabouts to drive through, or that roundabouts even existed when we went through driver's ed. So understanding that position of discomfort and providing, that proactive outreach and education of how we get through it, I think is really important. Also, a message that we tend to hear a lot is, I drove through a bad roundabout once. That means all roundabouts are bad. This is something that comes up over and over again, and we don't hold traffic signals to the same standard. We don't say, oh, I drove through a bad traffic signal once, therefore all traffic signals are bad. So helping people try to understand the parallels and give them the information they need and show them what good designs actually look like and why they work is really important, again, to building that trust. A lot of that goes into some of the performance metrics that Katie's going to talk about a little bit later, but again, foundational for building trust. So in our field, we have a history of more limited outreach as opposed to a newer shift towards proactive outreach and the benefits that we can see from that. Historically, we've had more of a one and done mentality of we're going to go give the public what they need to know, and it is what it is. We're not taking feedback from them. We're not asking for their voices. We're not asking for tribal voices if we happen to share overlapping jurisdictions or we're neighbors. And that has led to a lot of strain within communities. I've seen that a lot in rural communities, especially. Whereas if we're proactive in our outreach, then that tends to address all of these issues, and we can build trust and we confirm that we're aligned with what the communities need and what they prioritize. And we can work together to find solutions that work for everyone. Also, going back to this, it's not a one and done idea. As your project moves forward, there are going to be different things we need from the community and different things the community needs from us. When we hear about concerns early on, one that came up for me a couple of years back was a very rural roundabout. There were a lot of people walking on the shoulders of the highway. So they needed pedestrian crossings, which we weren't aware of, and we never would have been aware of it had we not reached out early to ask our tribal partners, hey, this is what we think needs to happen at this location. Do you agree? Do you have any thoughts of other things we should add or do differently? So we want to be able to work together as early as possible so that there's still time to make these changes. And then, of course, as our project progresses, we're going to have different things to talk about. When we're in the alternatives identification phase, we're not going to be talking about construction phasing. And when we're getting towards final design, we don't want to tell them about all the alternatives that have already been sifted through and decisions have already been made. Being transparent with communities builds trust and improves our project outcomes. So how would we go about developing an outreach strategy? The first thing we need to do is to define what our goals are. We need to understand our community's needs, what kind of participation we're looking for from them, what we want to give to them, and what we want them to give to us. We might be looking to strengthen relationships. Not all of these on this list are going to apply to every project, but these are common ones that pop up again and again. So in some communities, freight is going to be a really big deal. And in other communities, it might be agriculture or both. So we want to understand what those needs are. We want to understand those design vehicles, and we want to be inclusive so that we're not steamrolling people. That helps communities feel heard, which can be particularly difficult when we're in rural settings where the population is dispersed over a wide area of land. So once we've got our goals, we need to think about who our project partners are, and we break them into different levels of influence. Our decision makers, whether those are internal or external, we need their concurrence. We need their support. The project dies if we don't have it. Key partners, on the other hand, we don't necessarily require their concurrence. They might be people like landowners or a business, a nearby business. These are folks that we would really like to have their support, but it doesn't automatically kill the project. And then we have the next group down, which is more of our general partners, stakeholders, the general driving public, anyone who's going to use the intersection. And we want their support, but more than that, we want a lack of opposition from them. One angry driver is not enough to shut down a project, whereas one angry decision maker can be. So because of this, we're going to scale our level of outreach based on the influence that each group holds for our project. Now, okay, we've got goals, we've got audiences. What are the communication tools and methods that we have in our toolbox? These that I've got up on the screen right now, some flyers and brochures that I really like from different DOTs and a local city. They're great for in-person events and to post on project websites or virtual open houses. It lets people read things at their leisure and learn when they're ready to, when it's convenient for them. Another great option is to have videos available, whether that's an in-person and you've got videos running on a screen at your open house or your community event, or whether it's in your virtual open house, your website, whatever you've got there. These four from TxDOT that we mentioned earlier, with Amanda Austin as the RAID lead. She led the development of these Roundabout videos as well. I think they're really fantastic. I recommend that you go and check them out. They're also very adaptable. They're not super Texas specific, so they can be shown at any public engagement event. Another great tool is to use scale models. It gives a very hands-on learning experience. And if you happen to print them at the same scale that model train enthusiasts use, you can get scaled vehicles for this, this hands-on activity. In here, I'm showing some kids at a local STEM night how a WB67 would drive through this particular roundabout. So that was good engagement for them, and having their parents listen to was really good. Now, these last couple that I want to share are a little bit different than the others. The first one is a roundabout rodeo. If you have a good big paved area that you can, survey out and paint a roundabout to scale on, and then invite your freight, your agriculture, your emergency services, that's great to let them come and do a drive-through and gain comfort and confidence in both your design and their abilities to drive through it. I've seen where sometimes drivers will also ask a project member to do a ride along. So you can be in there in the cab with them, providing real-time advice like, oh, we want you to hug this curb. Oh no, we designed it so that your rear tires are going to track over the truck apron. That's on purpose for you. That type of information. Another thing, the last one that I really want to hit on here, is when you have in-person events, think about having kids' activities available. Not only does this help kids learn about what we're doing and make roundabouts more normalized and less of a concern for them as they grow up, but it also gives mom and dad a little bit of time to talk with the project team, learn what's going on, maybe get some education as well while the kiddos are safely taken care of. Okay, so now we've got our goals, our audience, our tools. Now it's time to make our outreach plan for each of those groups. We need to think about what they need, what information they need, how they like to communicate, where are we going to reach them, how often, and who do you need to reach out to first? All the different groups may be getting similar but slightly different information, and that's great, that's appropriate. But considering who you need to reach out to first can be really important. Reaching out to decision makers first we want to get that high level of concurrence buy-in before we go and talk to property owners or the general public. Because if the decision makers don't agree, they can shut down the project. Also, if you have a low level of trust with your decision makers for whatever reason, it's going to take more work to get their buy-in. So be aware of that, and that it's not always a quick process. It can definitely take time. So once we've got all that figured out, it's just we execute the plan. We plan the work and we work the plan. Now, this is all kind of a lot, I recognize. So let's go through a sample outreach plan that was inspired by one of my favorite projects, working with a tribal nation. Yakama Nation had overlapping jurisdiction for this project. And I'd like to just point out that if you've worked with one tribe, you have worked with one tribe. Every tribe is different. The expectations, the processes, the whole thing, what worked with one tribe may or may not work with another tribe. So let's keep in mind that all tribal nations are different and are going to have different processes and expectations. So that said, I like to develop a table for my outreach plans that includes all of this information about who it is, what level of support I need from them, what information are we giving and getting, and how are we doing that. So in this example, we have the county commissioners. They hold the purse strings. We need their level of concurrence. We talk with them, we meet with them, we get their buy-in. We move to our next level of concurrence, which is the Tribal Nation Engineering Department. So through proactive outreach and intentional engagement and relationship building, we work with them to help them understand why we think this is an appropriate solution for our intersection, and ask what their concerns are and work to alleviate those concerns. This again can take a good amount of time depending on the state of your relationship. But let's assume that we get their relationship. In my experience with the Yakama Nation, once we got engineering's buy-in, we asked, okay, what's the next step in getting tribal leadership's concurrence? Because we want to be respectful and we don't want to be making assumptions or stepping on toes. So in this case, the Tribal Nations Engineering Department decided that the best way to move forward was to elevate it internally through to their own leadership. And if we hadn't had engineering department's support, we never would have earned the support of leadership either. So eventually, through meetings that we attended by invitation, we were able to build that trust to a level where we got their concurrence. And from there, we were able to go out to the public and share a little bit different information with them and have some different methods of communication. So now we get to the end of the outreach strategy and we debrief at the end of the project. We want to think about, okay, did we achieve our goals? Were our messages well understood? What worked really well that we can build on for our future successes? And did we have any missteps, things that we might want to do differently with our next roundabout? As with any project, debriefing helps us learn from our successes, but also our stumbles so that we can adapt and try something different to do better next time. So now I'd like to share just a few lessons learned with y'all. We really want to begin outreach early, and especially with our decision makers. This is when we have the most time for collaboration. It shows that we value decision makers' opinions, we value the relationship, that we want to work together as a team. As we get farther down the line, it gets harder and harder to make those adjustments, to have opportunities to collaborate, and to ultimately build the trust. Something that I want us to remember is that in-person open houses reach a pretty narrow slice of our communities. They tend to be people who already have strong opinions about what we're doing. And they also tend to leave out people who have logistical barriers, like folks who don't have childcare or shift workers or whatever the reason is. So increasing our options into maybe a virtual open house reaches a different segment of the population. Or my personal favorite is attending local events. You get a much broader swath of the community. They see you being present in the community, and you get a lot of people who are unfamiliar with the project. And so they're more inquisitive as opposed to people who already have strong negative bias. Now, finally, like, we need to recognize that communities have to be able to trust us, to trust their project teams, because without the trust, projects won't move forward. They've got to trust us. And if we have a trust issue, then teaming with a local partner who is trusted within the community can open a lot of doors, but that doesn't mean that we automatically get the trust because we're friends with them. We still have to earn that trust. We still have to do the work. And once we do, we see things starting to improve in increments. Also, remember that a relationship didn't become strained overnight, and so they're not going to heal overnight either. So you have to be willing to put in the time and the consistency to really make those changes. And then to wrap things up, effective outreach improves project outcomes and sets you on a positive trajectory for the future. Each project, each town, each county, each tribal nation, everybody's different. So we need to think about who we're working with, what our goals are, and we need to build trust so that we can build roundabouts. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so very much, Shannon. That was a great overview of communication. We've had a lot of questions come in for you as well. So we have one more speaker to go, and then we will dive into some of these questions. Again, as you come up with those questions, please go ahead and put them into our Q&A pod so we make sure we can get to as many of them as possible after our final speaker. And so now I am very excited to introduce to you guys Katie Handel. She is also a professional engineer and a senior transportation engineer, roundabout subject matter expert with Jacobs. She is a geometric specialist with 12 years of consulting experience focused on roundabout design, planning, and analysis. She enjoys making a difference in communities by working on projects that enhance pedestrian, cyclist, and driver safety. She serves on the Transportation Research Board's Standing Committee on Roundabouts and Alternative Intersections, and I'm very excited for her to take over our presentation now and speak more in detail about roundabouts.
Jamie, get it pulled up here. All right, just checking you can see that okay?
Yep, that's great.
Awesome. As Jamie said, I'm Katie Handel, roundabout specialist. My 12 years of experience has been focused almost exclusively on roundabout planning and design. And all I could talk to you about roundabouts all day. Today, I want to discuss the practical applications that I feel are most important to building a successful rural roundabout design. So as we consider the components of design, I want to kind of group them into two categories. So first, on our left side here, we have our geometry. This is our physical elements like curbing and islands. These elements are responsible for pointing drivers in the right direction, encouraging them to slow down, and ensuring accessibility for everyone from the largest trucks down to pedestrians. Then on the right, we have our visibility package, which is made up of supporting elements, which are things like signing, marking, or lighting. These serve to strategically draw attention to the changing condition, define our decision points, and reinforce the geometric design. Our goal is to harmonize these elements to provide the safe, efficient, and low-speed environment that make roundabouts such safe intersections. So to make sure we're all on the same page, I want to quickly define a few terms that I'm going to be using through the rest of the presentation. First, we have inscribed circle diameter, or ICD. This is the outer edge of the circular intersection. While it is often a circle, it can also be an oval or a peanut shape, as that might fit better into a skewed intersection. Next, we have the circulatory roadway, which is the counterclockwise travel path around the intersection. Continuing inward, we have the truck apron. This is for large vehicle off tracking. It's typically raised above the travel lane by a few inches. You'll see this in the center of most roundabouts, but you may see additional truck aprons along exterior curb lines as well. Then the innermost portion of the circle is the center island. It's often domed and landscaped, providing target value to cue drivers to the changing condition. Moving back outward to the legs, we have our splitter islands. These are generally raised, but the characteristics can vary quite a bit depending on the approach roadway. And then lastly are chicanes. These are the successive reverse curvatures on the approach that help induce that natural deceleration. Chicanes are a common on high-speed approaches, but they're not necessarily required. So horizontal geometrics are the foundation of a roundabout success. And good roundabout geometry requires three things: proper deflection, the geometry and channelization needs to point drivers in the right direction. Second is appropriate speed control. That approach geometry needs to have drivers slowing down. And third is a fluid drive path. It should be comfortable to negotiate the roadway, no sharp movements or jerking of the steering wheel required. So I want to make a distinction that most of roadway design is code or dimension based, like the Green Book or State Design Manual. And as Brian mentioned earlier, roundabout design is performance based, meaning the success of a design is verified by its ability to meet the needs of the unique user group while implementing these three key principles. While all three of these principles are important, the one I want to zoom in on today is speed control. This is essential to obtain safe operation for a roundabout with high-speed approaches like we see in a lot of rural settings. The approach geometry must induce the natural slowing to get us down to the circulating speeds, which are typically in the 15 to 25 mph range. This is often achieved using chicanes with that progressively smaller radii as you get closer to the yield line. This gets us the low speed differentials between the movements, which in turn reduces potential collision severity. We also get efficient operation from this by allowing for natural deceleration and acceleration patterns. I'm going to kind of zoom out onto a leg here and talk about a few different elements. So on high-speed roadways, it's important that we provide adequate advance warning to comfortably have drivers stopping by the yield line or by the crosswalk if we have them. We can apply operation and design principles similar to freeway exit ramps, remembering to account for any grades. This graphic here depicts a tangential approach, but if you have chicanes, remember to consider the super elevations that may be necessary as you're selecting the horizontal radii for those especially broad and mid-range radii of your chicane. So splitter islands are going to be kind of encompassed within that deceleration length. A rule of thumb I really like to use is to have the splitter island match the length of my stopping sight distance. This isn't always feasible, but in general, the higher the approach speed, the longer we want our splitter island to be to provide as much advance warning as possible. In the case of rural roundabouts, we generally want splitter islands to be raised and non-traversable to assist with the visibility on the approach. For hardscaped islands, it's important to prioritize color contrast. For example, if you've got an asphalt pavement, try to avoid black or dark gray for your splitter island color. This prevents them from blending in with the surrounding pavement. You can also consider using distinct colors for splitter islands and truck aprons to help freight differentiate between surfaces that are intended to be mounted, like truck aprons, and non-traversable surfaces, like our splitter islands. So most rural roads have paved or gravel shoulders, but it is recommended to introduce curbs as you approach a roundabout. Exterior curbing provides drivers the sense they're entering a more controlled environment, and it helps visually narrow that travel lane, which helps encourage the natural slowing in conjunction with our horizontal curvature. I often like to start my exterior curbing right around the nose of the splitter island, like is depicted in this photo on the right. Mountable curbing is recommended for high-speed approaches as it's less likely to be damaged by an errant vehicle. I think it's important to note that just because we have exterior curbing does not mean we have to have a closed drainage system. We could provide some curb openings or scuppers, kind of like these two photos on the lower left, that allow us to maintain more of a natural drainage pattern. Or another strategy I like for rural locations especially is grading the roundabout so that the ICD is kind of the high point of the intersection. Not only does this help with the visibility of it on the approach, but it lets water kind of drain away from the center naturally so we can avoid having that closed drainage system. The last geometric consideration I want to touch on is active transportation. Even in a rural environment, we still want to consider our non-motorized users. Not everyone drives, and we often still see cyclists or joggers out in rural areas. At one of the roundabouts Shannon worked on with Yakima Nation, there was actually a video captured of folks using the RRFBs, the crosswalks on horseback. So we have lots of different types of active transportation, even in rural areas. This is definitely an evolving practice, and while we might not build full-scale active transportation facilities in rural areas now, we also don't want to preclude them in the future. These strategies I've seen applied at rural roundabouts to make space for active transportation include things like at-grade or raised shoulders, like are depicted in these two photos here from WashDOT. These are shared facilities, just like a normal roadway shoulder, but in the case of Roundabout, they can serve the dual purpose of supporting active transportation and large vehicle off-tracking. I've also seen agencies either go ahead and construct a median opening in a splitter island just with no detectable warning, since there's no actual pedestrian receiving facility, or just plan ahead and leave space in the splitter island for them and do an asphalt infill that can be easily removed if they want to add active transportation facilities later. Another thing I've seen is some agencies aren't actually constructing any facilities at all right now, but they are being forward compatible by buying right away or grading a level pad outward in order to be able to easily come back and add a future installation. Change gears and fast forward a little bit and say you've completed your initial 2D layout. Now it's time for you to verify that that layout meets the needs of all of your users. I like to make exhibits for every roundabout to vet and document the design. Like Brian stressed earlier, design is iterative. These checks are going to help you understand where you may need to adjust and optimize your roundabout. So I have some of the single lane roundabout performance checks listed here, but in the interest of time, I'm actually going to zoom in on the two today that I feel are most important for rural roundabouts. And those are going to be turning movements and speed control. So I encourage you to go check out Chapter 9 of NCHRP 1043. It really does a nice job explaining all these different checks, and there are samples for practical application provided in the appendix of that as well. So before we run our turning simulations, I want to encourage you that it's really worth the time to determine what vehicles realistically need to traverse the roundabout. Most likely, I heard Brian say it earlier too, not every large vehicle is going to be making every movement. Taking the time to right size our roundabout prevents under and over design. It's going to help protect our investment, reducing the likelihood of damaged curbs or signs. And it's also going to help build a positive relationship with the freight community when the trucks can negotiate comfortably. So I want to start off by making a distinction between a design vehicle and an accommodated or controlled vehicle. So a design vehicle is our regular user. For example, on a state highway, you probably see several WB62 or WB67 tractor trailers a day. Your design vehicle should be traversing the roundabout with any truck cabs in the lane, but the trailer may off track on truck aprons or shoulders. Remember, design vehicles can be selected by movement or leg. The major leg might need to support WB67s, but maybe the minor leg just needs to be a school bus or a fire truck, something a little smaller. So on the other hand, there's our control vehicle. This is an infrequent user. Think once a week, once a month, once a year, or I've had some that only even come up every few years, and maybe they move at night. They're very infrequent. This could be anything from a lowboy to farm equipment to wind turbines or refinery equipment. Control vehicles are usually making specific movements. I like to request records from my state's permit office to see what loads have traveled through the intersection in the past and with what frequency. This helps me get a good idea of what may need to move through it in the future and what we can realistically accommodate with the design. For oversized overweight loads, it's important to pay attention to not just the trailer swept path, but the load overhangs. This can be in length, like this pull truck you see on the top photo here. Those logs hang quite a bit off the back and they swing quite a lot laterally off that back end and even between the axles. So you need to watch where you're placing your signs, your luminaires, or any landscaping to make sure that they don't get damaged by some of the large loads. And then for lowboy trailers, we also need to pay attention to low vertical clearances. Carefully site your high points in conjunction with the turning movements to prevent these trailers from high centering. that brings us to conducting the actual performance checks. I just want to quickly cover a few rules of thumb for turning movements. We want to conduct any simulations using smooth, natural drive paths. We don't want to see any stopping of the vehicle or having to make a sharp steering wheel turn in those simulations. Trucks do tend to negotiate roundabouts pretty slowly, so you can reduce your negotiation speeds to more accurately reflect the vehicle's capabilities. I like to provide a minimum of a foot clearance to face the curves and keep tires off gutter pans when I'm doing simulations. Instead of designing for an A+ driver, maybe aim to design for your C+ driver to provide a little bit of a wiggle room and help protect the curves and make it more negotiate. The interior truck apron is also sized using these turning movements. 3 to 15 feet apron width is pretty typical. I'd say maximum of 20 feet, because when you start getting wide aprons, you start losing your center island, which is providing us the target value on the approach. If your apron is coming out to need to be larger than 15 feet, it might be a good time to pause and evaluate if your location might be served better with a larger inscribed circle diameter. The other performance check I want to zoom in on today is geometric speed. This is also commonly referred to as fastest path. It's a quantitative evaluation of our speed control using offsets of geometric features to estimate the fastest drive path through the roundabout. The resulting radii from that then correlate to negotiation speeds. This is where we're checking to see that we have those low speeds and low speed differentials between movements, with the R1 speed, which is the entry, being the most critical due to it often having the highest differential regulating traffic. There are several objective and repeatable methods out there that you can use to calculate fastest path. NCHRP 1043 provides some nice resources to walk you through this in Appendix A. All right, we're going to take another jump forward here since we only got 15 minutes and say we have our 2D layout locked in. So at this time, we're going to change our focus to supporting elements. The elements I want to touch on today are some that I feel are the most important to rural roundabouts, and that includes signing, marking, lighting, and landscaping. The treatments I'm going to highlight today are certainly not an all-encompassing list, but rather just a few that I've seen successfully applied at rural locations to enhance visibility. I want to reinforce that these supporting elements are really here as an enhancement and to improve operations. They are not a substitute for sound geometric design. I encourage you to draw on what we already know works. Maybe use some of the FHWA proven safety countermeasures and see if there's an application that you can use for your roundabout too. So first up is signing. Advanced guide signs are recommended for high-speed approaches. They serve as an early warning to the changing condition, and they help spread out the decision points for drivers as they're slowing towards the intersection. I personally really like gated warning signs for high-speed approaches where we have dual warning signs with one on each side of the roadway. There are also several LED treatments from flashing borders, like is depicted in this photo here, to beacons or even radar feedback signs. On the US 97 roundabouts, WashDOT installed flashing beacons along with the gated warning signs. I don't think it was intentional, but the beacons are actually operating at slightly different wigwag rates on either side, and it's really eye-catching, and I think it helps a lot with the visibility on a high-speed approach. So we can apply supplemental marking treatments to reinforce geometric features. Again, you can look at some proven safety countermeasures, like maybe wide edge lines or rumble stripes. The one I really want to highlight today is the optical speed bars. A lot of this research is focused on horizontal curves, but I'm seeing them applied more and more on roundabouts, especially in locations where maybe you can't get the splitter island like you want, like you have a bridge or some reason that it's not going to work. I really like the optical speed bars because they help visually narrow the travel lane and they encourage slowing as the bars become more tightly spaced. All of these marking treatments are relatively low cost, but they can make a big difference in your visibility. Lighting is another proven safety countermeasure. It is a policy level decision varying from agency to agency. In some areas, I know this can be a challenge in rural places if you don't have a power source readily available. Many agencies choose to begin illumination at the nose of the splitter island to highlight that horizontal curvature and raised feature, but research has indicated that even partial illumination is beneficial. For rural locations especially, remember to consider the transition zones if there's no other roadway lighting nearby for that. And last, I want to touch on landscaping and the vertical design of the center island. In addition to mounding the island, landscaping can help control sight distance, promote lower speeds, and reduce headlight glare. It can also offer a placemaking opportunity to create a gateway if your roundabout sited in a changing roadway condition. Maybe we're going from a high-speed highway into town. That can be a really nice feature for the community. Typically, we want to see something low maintenance, especially for rural locations. I've seen several really neat hardscape or rock options that can still provide the safety enhancements we're looking for. So I'm going to leave you with 3 key takeaways, and it's that geometrics are especially critical for roundabouts with high-speed approaches to get the performance we want and to realize those safety benefits. We want to right-size the roundabout for our unique user mix at our site, and we can use the supporting elements to strategically enhance our visibility. So I hope you can leave today's webinar from great presentations by Shannon and Brian feeling ready and confident Roundabout can help solve a safety problem in your area. That's what I got. Thanks for joining us.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And at this time, I'm going to invite our speakers to please turn your videos on. And we're going to go ahead and take questions. We've had quite a few come through. Perfect. So we're going to get started right away. I see Brian's been going through the Q&A pod and answering quite a few. So if you did put in one of the early questions, please take a look at those answers that Brian's been putting in just so we can get through quite a few of these. We did have one that came in before the webinar even occurred. So I'd like to start with that one. And I'll ask and see whichever one of you would like to jump in. It's that this person has observed that some roundabouts have posted advisory speeds on the approaches and some do not. The current MUTCD does not appear to require them. Can you comment on the use of them in this situation? And Katie, you were just talking a little bit about this. So if you want to address that.
I can if you want, Brian. Brian has probably taken a more realistic look at that too, because the recommendations have not always aligned between what's in the roundabout guide and what's in the MUTCD. I think Brian might be the best person to take a whack at that one, actually.
Yeah, the short story is they're never really produced at the same time. For example, when the first roundabout guide came out in 1999 from the Federal Highway Administration, the MUTCD had, for example, a roundabout that looked like the state of New Mexico symbol. And so it takes a little bit while for those two to come together. But I think really the key is advisory signs aren't always needed. And a big part of that is the roadway geometric. So you're going to go through roundabouts that some have them and some don't have them. One of the biggest issues that came on with early roundabouts was over-signing. They were way too many messages, too many signs, too many messages on the signs. And so there was a real swing in our industry to move away from over-signing and really allow the roadway geometrics, all the things that Katie was talking about in terms of supporting visibility of the change of the segment to the roundabout influence area. Those features that were coming up in the roundabout that Katie showed, having geometric features like those nice splitter islands that had those qualities and characteristics that supported that. So anyway, you're going to see that roundabouts have been around long enough now that some of them still have one-way signs in the interior versus going to chevrons. But I would say that don't let that become a real critical feature in the success of your roundabout design.
Another question that came in was about communicating information. So is there signing available to communicate with the public that the trucks might straddle the lanes? For instance, possibly don't drive beside a truck in a roundabout.
Yeah, there's, I guess what I want to say is anytime you ask a question about a roundabout, what I always say is step back and what would we do at any other conventional intersection? We have signalized intersections all over the place that have double left, sometimes double right, sometimes triple left turns. And we have large trucks next to cars all the time. We have all of those things. And do we put up a whole bunch of special signs at every signalized intersection that might have trucks and cars together? No, we don't. So let's not start holding the roundabout to a different level. Think about a roundabout is just an intersection. That's all it is. It's an intersection. So the basic elements of driver expectancy for left to go left and right to go right, that's the same with the roundabout. Large trucks at a roundabout. The issue with larger trucks at roundabouts is that that sometimes states went to a specific effort to design the roundabout so that a large truck, that larger vehicle that Katie was talking about, could stay in its lane. But the truck drivers don't feel comfortable doing that. And so they would take their own space and essentially drive in such a way is that they wouldn't have anybody before them or after them. So what we really found in 1043, and it's indicated in the synthesis, is that there's just there aren't as many issues as we designers think as there is in practice. And so what I would suggest is read through the information that's in 1043, the synthesis about designing for trucks. Don't overly worry about large trucks. We've had roundabouts in the United States for over 25 years now, and we're going to keep having them. And we have lots and lots of trucks, and it's a very, very small portion of what key issues there are out there. I'm not saying it's unimportant. It's just a small portion of the issues that you would have.
We had another question about resources and communication as well. And this one was, does anyone have or know of resources for the placement of school crossing guards at roundabouts?
When we did 1043, there was nothing explicit about that. But there have been school crossing guards at roundabouts for over 20 years. And I think that each of them finds their own special way to make it work. I would say that's the key, but I don't know of any study, and I'd be really cautious. Again, the guide 1043 is based on principles and applications and context. So I would be really remiss to say we should put out some criteria about where guards should be and tell them how to do their job when they're on the ground at that spot. And it may be different for elementary school compared to high school and the mix of traffic and composition. So that's my opinion, but Katie and Shannon may have a different point of view.
I think that in my experience, it's been a school district by school district decision of what they feel is best for their community.
Perfect, thank you. And if anyone listening today has some information on what their school district may have done, if you want to drop that in the chat pod, we'd love to hear your experiences. The next question for you all is, are there any types of checklists where you can check if an intersection has a certain number of criteria where it should be an alternative? This person is working on a study of a subsection of a city with about a half dozen intersections, and there's one that's actually received some public interest in a roundabout, but they're not sure how to find out if it's actually a good candidate.
First and foremost, what I'll highlight is our industry has evolved to have intersection control evaluations. There's great documents nationally. So any intersection, I'd say, is a viable candidate potentially for a roundabout. But the intersection control evaluation process or methods, there's a lot of good documentation. That's a great place to start about where and how you might look at two things: the intersection form itself and the traffic control strategy. So roundabout obviously is a yield control, but alternative reduced conflict intersections like displaced left turns, restricted crossing U-turns, and the array of those are forms, but sometimes there can be stop controlled, signal controlled, and yield controlled. But I would encourage this user to take a look at some of the intersection control evaluation documentation. And somebody can correct me, but I think it's like NCHRP research report, is it 1098 or so? It's along those lines. But those are objective ways to be able to look at. But a roundabout should be put in as any probably any condition. It may get screened out immediately, but it should always be put in as an option. You do not need a warrant to do a roundabout. That's the last thing that we want to do, is provide limits to why we can't put in roundabouts.
The next question is there a minimum area of right-of-way required to design a roundabout?
Katie?
Not necessarily. It's really context based. Like, I'll give an example of right now. I'm working on some with Washington State DOT, and they're pretty compact locations. We're on rural high speed locations, like 55 plus. some of our ICDs are really on the smaller end. We're still looking at something above 80 feet, maybe like 80 to 110 feet. So it kind of does depend. Roundabouts do require a little more space. I guess back in the day, everybody used to say wide nodes, narrow roads. But so there is going to be some amount that is going to be required. And really the way I like to think of it is when I'm on a high speed location, what's kind of the minimum inscribed circle diameter that's going to work with my vehicle mix, where I still have a little bit of center island left, really, because that target value for the approach and that visibility enhancement is really important in order to get drivers adequate notice to be slowing down. We do have a few in that program that are actually do have the flush center island. So in those cases, we're looking at some extra visibility enhancements for those.
Yeah. Two things. One is, thank you, Jerry Roach, who said that it's NCHRP report 1087. They said that's the new ICE guide. Thank you. But one thing, Katie, that I have found is that often we have plenty of room where the roundabout is, but many times the right-of-way that, roundabout performance, as you indicated, is by size, location, and approach geometry. And sometimes the right-of-way or the impact isn't at the circle location. It can actually be on the roadway approaches. If we have a skewed intersection, especially, one is we'll typically find that the roundabout ICD has to be a little bit larger. But sometimes we need to do roadway approach features that actually have right-of-way impacts outside the circle. So think about the roundabout as the circle and its approaches, and that's really the roundabout influence area.
On the same regard to the talking about smaller roundabouts, we had a question. It was in here. Has anyone piloted small mini roundabouts in rural neighborhoods that have state roads intersect with local roads?
I don't think and Katie and Shannon jump in. I don't think who owns the road really makes a difference. So I just would say, don't worry about state roads, local roads. I don't know what that would have to do. I mean, I can have local roads that have more volume than some state road traffic, but what's it called? Washtenaw County, Michigan. I forgot how to pronounce that name. But boy, they were really progressive in applying compact or mini style designs in applications that they did roadway approach geometry and features to help support speed reduction. But gosh, it's a really great example of rural applications of compact mini roundabouts, but they use appropriate treatments and speed reduction elements in advance. But Katie and Shannon, maybe you have some examples too.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think it's really, again, a case of like, think less of the category. We like to put our roundabouts into categories, less about the category, more about how that characteristics of that roundabout are performing for drivers to interact with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask one more question. We had two questions come in about the same topic, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. So the first question was, when there is no electric supply at a rural roundabout, any success with solar lights and battery backup? And the other one that came in on the same topic was, have agencies looked at lighting constraints at rural roundabouts, especially if electric companies cannot easily bring electric to the area?
Katie or Shannon, you want to start with that?
I have not personally done any with solar lighting at this to date. I did see somebody drop in the chat. I think NCDOT had several that were did not have illumination at their roundabout. I would have to do a little research into how those are performing versus some, other similar ones in the area that do have lighting.
In my experience, the agencies that I was working with did have lighting available that could be tapped into. The only time that I can recall seeing solar power is just for the RRFBs, the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, to improve visibility at crosswalks.
And then I'll go back, and I agree, I haven't heard of any investigations of solar powered roadway illumination, but I'm going to go back to the basic question of, what do we do at rural locations for, say, a four-way stop or a two-way stop? Do we go with the heck and light the heck out of it? So don't hold the roundabout to any higher criteria, but that's where I was highlighting that in the illumination section, delineation is such a critical factor. excellent geometrics first, start with geometrics, and then have a corresponding delineation. So raised pavement markings, reflected markings on the curbs, type 1, all of those can be in there, but don't hold the roundabout to a higher standard than you would at any other conventional location. You're gonna have an intersection that has a high potential for crashes. You have to make design choices. Look ahead, don't penalize a roundabout.
And thank you for all of those answers. And we also had a couple of people joining us in the chat pod with answers on the lighting as well. So go ahead and take a look at those. I do want to say thank you again to Katie, Shannon, and Brian. This has been fantastic. It was one of our largest webinars we've had so far. So thank you again. Everyone in the chat has been posting how amazing this was and how much information they've really learned. We had a lot of questions that we weren't able to get to, but I'm hoping that the resources that we provided you can help with those. We did have one that asked about videos for outreach. So please go ahead and take a look again at that podcast that I mentioned. I dropped that in the chat earlier. There are some videos in the resources for that podcast that you can take a look at. And I also dropped the link again for Roundabouts Week and FHWA's website. They also have several videos for outreach that can be used as well. So thank you all again. Happy Roundabouts Week. And we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you.
Roundabouts Week.